I'm Jack Bradley in for Steve Lance tonight. And President Trump is urging drug makers to prove vaccine effectiveness as he says debates are dividing the CDC. He's also touting a victory in D.C. crime while urging other cities to work with him. NTD's Washington correspondent Mari Otsu brings us the latest.
President Trump today is urging drug companies to make public data on COVID vaccines that they've shared with him to clear up what he calls a mess over the drug's effectiveness. The president demands an answer as he says the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is being ripped apart over the question. Last week, the president touted his first administration's vaccine development efforts during COVID.
Operation Warp Speed, people say, is one of the greatest achievements ever in politics or in the military, because it was almost a military procedure.
In his Monday post, President Trump acknowledges debates over vaccine effectiveness. Just last week, the CDC director was fired over disagreements over vaccine policy with Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Several officials stepped down in protest. And in other news, President Trump is praising D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser for working with his administration to combat crime in the nation's capital.
We greatly appreciate the surge of officers that enhance what MPD has been able to do in this city. The difference between this period, this 20-day period of this federal surge and last year represents a 87% reduction in carjackings in Washington, D.C.
Since the D.C. crime crackdown began 3 weeks ago, authorities have made over 1,500 arrests and seized over 160 illegal guns. The president is calling D.C. a, quote, giant victory and says that the crime rate has come down to virtually nothing. 54 people were shot and 7 killed in Chicago over Labor Day weekend. But the Chicago mayor this weekend ordered city police not to work with National Guard troops as President Trump threatens to send them.
It's un-American, if you ask me. A U.S. president invading an American city. I've never heard of such a thing. It shouldn't happen.
While Governor Pritzker warns that a federal deployment without the state's request would be unconstitutional, the president urges Democratic leaders to work with his administration, just like the D.C. mayor. The White House on Thursday saying,
as President Trump has said, all of these elected officials in charge have to do is pick up the phone and ask for the president and the federal government's help. President
Trump says that Mayor Bowser's ratings have gone up since her cooperation and that other cities could see similar results if they worked with his administration. Reporting from the White House, Mari Otsu, NTD News.
And now to discuss the latest on the surge in federal authorities in D.C. and a potential expansion to other states, we're joined by Democratic strategist Lee Neves and former Republican Congresswoman Nan Hayworth. Thank you both very much for joining us here. First off, let's get into gas prices. They're down to the lowest levels nationally that we've seen since 2021, now at an average of $3.19 per gallon. The highest we saw in 2022 at $3.78 per gallon. Congresswoman Hayworth, how much of this can be attributed to the Trump administration, and do you see this impacting the 2026 midterms at all?
Well, I think if the trend continues, it's definitely going to be a big hit among American consumers. And certainly the price at the pump is something that affects a majority of Americans, no doubt. And it's a regressive kind of situation because it affects people at every level. So what has President Trump done? Well, he has unleashed the power of American energy development. He has enhanced permitting. He has streamlined the procedures for establishing energy development and the transfer of energy. He's freed up the liquefied natural gas market so that we can sell around the world. That doesn't directly affect our price at the pump, but certainly what it does is it makes America once again much closer to energy independent, if not indeed energy dominant in the U.S. market.
And Lee, do you see this impacting the midterms? Do people only notice when the price of gas goes up?
Well, I mean, first of all, you pointed out the downward trend in gas prices started in the middle of 2022 while President Biden was still president. I think the big thing here is the volatility, and I'll just throw a few numbers at you. According to AAA, in January, the gas price was $3.11. Now it's up to $3.19. ending the week of August 25th, not taken in the Labor Day spike, taken in the Labor Day spike. In July, according to AAA, gas price is $3.14. Now it's up to $3.21. There's a volatility of gas prices going up and down, and that's going to affect the American consumer. And look, I'm a guy who has to drive all over the place to go see my clients. I would love to see the gas price down. I've got an oil company for a client. I love easier permits for drilling. It's good for business. But what the American public wants to see, especially in 2026, they're going to want to see the volatility to go away. Because what you're seeing now is from week to week, prices can fluctuate from 20 cents down to 20 cents up. And consumers don't know, well, is the price of gas going to be up or down next week?
That's right. And as we head into winter, we can expect with the mixed blends to gas go down a bit. But I would like to get into the crime data in D.C. President Trump's working with Congress right now to put forward a crime bill. That's amid Trump dispatching the National Guard and federal authorities to D.C. Here's Speaker of the House Mike Johnson saying they're going to introduce a bill for D.C. first and then possibly other locations.
We're going to handle D.C. first because that's directly within our purview, and then look to other cities around America as well. We've got to also end these policing policies that have prevented law enforcement from actually keeping safety on the streets for residents and visitors who become victims. And that's an important thing to do. Sometimes local governance does not do the job, and the oversight in D.C. is long overdue.
Now, since Trump dispatched the federal authorities surge to D.C., crime rates have fallen 40%, about 40%, according to data from the Metropolitan Police Department here. Lee, do you think that Congress will back Trump up here and extend the surge past the 30 days that's allotted to him?
Well, you put troops and tanks on the streets of any city, and I think you're going to see crime go down, period. But it's Ben Franklin who said, those who give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. There's a way to do things. There's a way to bring crime down, and putting federal troops and tanks on American streets is not the way to do it. Now, I will credit the Republicans. Crime is a political winner for them. Crime is an absolute political winner for them. And as a Democrat, who led a campaign that defeated a George Soros-backed liberal district attorney back in 2022, I can tell you Democrats have been horrible on crime. This is all about political play for 2026. Democrats are bad on crime. That's why President Trump is flirting on Democratic cities. If this was actually about public safety, if he actually was about we're going to send federal troops to where it needs to be, then he would be asking the governors of Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Tennessee to invite in the National Guard, because they have 4 of the 5 highest murder per capita rates in the United States.
Congresswoman Hayworth, how do you respond to the concerns that Trump only wants to send the National Guard troops and federal authorities to Democrat-run cities and states?
Well, Lee is highlighting the fact that indeed it is our cities that are the most heinously affected by crime, and the cities in the states that Lee mentioned are all Democrat run, and I think at least some of them have Soros-backed prosecutors. So kudos to Lee for defeating at least one of them. Public safety is indeed a popular issue, but the reason it's a popular issue is because it affects people's lives and livelihoods. And we can certainly see that the folks in the small neighborhoods in D.C., the folks who aren't lobbyists, don't have fancy apartments, don't have security, are the ones who are the most grateful for the presence of the National Guard in D.C. Now, it's true, that's a federal district. But the way in which President Trump can introduce the idea of augmenting local police with National Guard in a place like Chicago is through invoking the Insurrection Act. And I have a close friend who's an attorney in Illinois who says that given the heavy activity of drug cartels in Chicago, this is one way of introducing that element of executive discretion from the federal level. But I also agree with Lee that, ideally, obviously, and not even ideally, but ultimately, it is the responsibility of communities, of cities, to manage crime appropriately. And there are a lot of consent decrees from the Obama era and perhaps even from the Biden administration that have in many ways handcuffed police departments in high crime places across the country. So those also need to be examined.
All right. Congresswoman Nan Hayworth, Lee Neves, thank you both very much for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Now, as we honor workers across America this Labor Day, are employees left out in the conflicts between big business and labor unions? To discuss, we welcome on Mark Mix, president of the National Right to Work Committee and Legal Foundation. Mark Mix, thank you so much for joining us here today. Really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, Jack, it's a privilege to be on with you this Labor Day to talk about, I guess, labor unions, right?
Absolutely. So today's Labor Day, where we celebrate the contributions of hardworking Americans, your foundation's name, the Right to Work. Tell us about this principle and how the way that unions are set up now may interfere with it.
Yeah, indeed, Jack. The very simple principle of the right to work movement is we believe every worker should have the right to join a union, and they ought to be able to exercise their rights within a union, but no one should be compelled or forced to join or pay dues to a union as a condition of getting or keeping a job in America. It's really simple. That's the good news. But defending employee rights in the workplace is the primary mission of our organization.
And so as unions stand now, what is getting in the way of that happening? I mean, can we have unions exist and have that principle work out as well?
Yeah, we absolutely can, Jack. You know, going back to the 1930s when our federal labor policy was promulgated under the Roosevelt administration, the premise of that legislation was basically to give union officials dramatic new powers over every worker in the country. And so if you come from 1935 till today, one of the things that's been missing from that equation is the employee rights that allegedly were guaranteed under that 1935 law. What it's turned out to be, really, in reality, is big business versus big labor, and the employees are left out of the equation, and that's where we fit in. You know, today, union officials only represent 5.9% of the private sector workforce, but yet if you ask anybody, they call it labor and labor this and labor that. But there are a lot of rights and responsibilities that individual employees have and can implement in the workplace, and we're here to help them do that.
And Mark, last week we saw President Trump signing an executive order that ends collective bargaining within federal unions. What could be the impact of this?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, the idea of monopoly unionism in government is a question that needs further debate. Franklin Roosevelt was asked the question about whether or not we should unionize government employees, and he said, it's unthinkable you would do that. It's just not the same as the private sector where you have substitutes to the services and the industries that are part of the private sector workforce. But what he's done is he said that, look, these private organizations that are our labor unions negotiating over terms and conditions of employment for government employees about how we run our government is a serious question. And what he did with his executive order, and it's something every president since Jimmy Carter has done since 1979, where they use basically the Federal Labor Relations Act and they exempt certain governmental activities from control, from union control over those activities. What President Trump has done is gone a little bit farther, and he says that any agency that has a national security platform or profile, we're not going to be negotiating with those unions anymore because those issues are so important to the country when it comes to our national security profile and our national security programs. I mean, obviously, this is more than any other president's done, but each time a president gets sworn in, they usually do this. They say, okay, here's certain activities of the government that should be exempt from negotiations with a private organization about how the agency should run.
And let's talk a little bit about the power that these union leaders have to set priorities, pursue political interests, for example, anti-Israel, anti-ICE protests. Is that cutting to the heart of this issue?
Yeah, absolutely, Jack. And that's a really important part. So I'm glad you brought it up. The question of what unions do as far as representing workers on the shop floor or in the workplace is a really important part of this debate. Unfortunately, as unions have grown in power and prestige and been given these privileges by government, they've turned to the political process for power and more privilege. And so they're very involved in politics. And those politics end up, for example, on a campus, like, for example, MIT, where the union there, the United Electrical Workers Union, why they have, representing graduate students at MIT is the first question. But secondly, why would they go out and use resources that graduate students have to pay as a condition of continuing their education and use that for, political operations like the anti-Semitism that's occurring on several college campuses around the country. We represented a bunch of employees from MIT. We got relief for over 3,000 graduate students that were forced to support a union that was fomenting unrest that called for the elimination of Israel, from, the river to the sea, and the boycott, divest, sanction programs of the unions.
Mark Mix, president of the National Right to Work Foundation, thank you so much for coming on.
Jack, it's a privilege. Thanks for the opportunity, and happy Labor Day.
Happy Labor Day.